Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the I'm Telling God About This podcast. Conor McGregor says he's been on a spiritual journey, claims to be following the teaching of Jesus. We have questions. We got a clip. Stick around to the end. We're going to talk about it and go through it. But first, there's a couple other stories we want to get into that have been going on in the Christian zeitgeist, so to speak. Josh, why don't you kick us off with the first one?
Okay, sure. So basically, I've seen so there's a tweet that went around with Allie Beth Stuckey. If you guys aren't familiar with Allie Beth Stuckey, she's a conservative commentator. She has a podcast. She posted this, and granted, this sounds like it's a Instagram poll that she did, but she said, I asked my 840,000 Instagram followers, mostly Christian women, about their biggest concern for the country right now, and by far the most common answer is the growing influence of Islam. I'd like to see what this concern reflects of the GOP ASAP, right? So she's pushing and like, hey, this is a genuine concern. Here's the thing. She's gotten a lot of pushback saying, you guys are Christians are Islamophobic. And what are you guys worried about? Now we're going from, one demon to another, right? You're against wokeism. Now you're against Islam and everything. And I'm like, dude, I'm going through and I'm doing the research on a lot of this stuff. And I'm like, we need to do an episode on the Crusades because this stuff has been going on.
I wish I had a helmet. I could have just pulled from the background and put on my head.
Dude,
Baldwin has entered the chat.
Yes. Dude, and if you guys look at the real story, the brilliant military mind that Baldwin was, man. It was amazing. So anyway, so there's a lot of pushback here, but here's the problem. Here's the problem that people don't really understand. There is, and this is like our first enemy, our first war in the United States was against these Muslim pirates that were essentially, you go into their land, you're not a Muslim, they kill you. That was the culture.
Oh, you're talking
That's
about
where I think the Marines
pirates?
got their nickname of the Leathernecks, because they started putting leather over their necks so you can't cut their heads off, right? So this country has a long history, I think, with this common enemy. But if you look at the way that they advance into these countries, I mean, back in the early 2000s, you have Germany, France, and then even in the United States, in Dearborn, Michigan, Minnesota, a lot of these Muslim communities will come in and they have small populations, right? And at first, they're just like part of the community. They don't really engage much. But once you get to a certain percentage of the population, they start evangelizing. They start doing dawah, which is their evangelism. But then the other aspect is they tend to all pull on government subsidies like some food stamps, welfare, all these handouts. And so they're not like a huge contribution, at least from a statistical standpoint. In a lot of these countries, they just get a lot of handouts, and they're not really integrating into the culture. And so also, in addition to that, I mean, wherever Islam has gone in the West, they've pushed out Christianity or carved out their own like sub communities within communities. Greg Abbott just passed a law, basically said that these Muslim cities that they're trying to erect in Texas, they're like, no, you can't do that. You can't have just these. It's like we only reserve centralized places for the Mormons, not Islam.
Not even that. But listen, that's a real thing, right? Like we have conversations about this with people all the time about, all of the things that people look at and value about these high demand religious societies. You sit and, talk with Muslims. Their family units are generally pretty tight. They've got a lot of control. They're centrally same thing with the LDS Mormon community, same thing. And it's because they have a incredibly high demand society. And the result of that is they're unwilling to compromise, so they don't integrate. And, I hate to say this too, is like part of this
punishment for apostasy is extreme.
Right. Obviously we don't have the same consequences for apostasy on this side of heaven, right? Like we're not called to do what, Muslims are called to do, or even what, Brigham Young called blood atonement, back in the day, that from the Mormon side.
Blood in, blood out.
Yeah.
Gang.
But the thing is there is a reality, though, in which people are starting to understand what some of these other groups do understand, which is that borders matter. And the border is the boundary of the worldview. And it's like when your definition, we say this all the time, and we cannot say this enough about why political action is important, why being involved in your community is important. It's because you really have to ask one fundamental question of your neighbor, and that is, how do you define good and how do you define evil? And if the answer to that
Right.
question is not, based on what the Bible says, then you need a
But
really, really big
But Josh, the
fence.
classical liberals have reliably informed me that we can have a truly neutral state that doesn't require us to make basic value judgments about actions. They were quite firm on this point.
Can we cut to the Chaz here? Just like the burning dumpster
That's right.
fire.
That's right.
Let's check
That's
in
so
on those
funny.
progressives and see how they're doing. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's the issue,
And
right?
that the problem I think that I foresee is, that I'm seeing is that Christianity has been neutered in such a way that says turn the other cheek to the Muslim invasions. Right? I'm not saying that this is
Okay,
a
I have a
literal
bone to pick
Muslim
real
invasion,
quick
like it's a
with both of
conquest.
you. With both of you. You were born speaking English, the language
Right.
that everybody else has to learn because it's more important for them to be able to speak with us than vice
Right.
versa. Why are you saying Muslim? Muslim.
Oh, because that's
Use your
Muslim is the actual term.
Muslim.
Muslim means servant or slave or something.
Muslim.
So that's
I know it's
It's
the
just a-
anglicized
I'm saying it
form.
accurately.
Everybody
Islamicist,
I get it.
Wahhabist.
So, but yeah, but here's the thing: like when it comes to the way that the Islam has affected the West, they always come in and they, except for the first 100 years or so of Islamic conquest, they're going raping and pillaging and doing terrible things, regardless of what the Islamic historians are saying. The original sources are telling these horrible things. But like what's happening now is they're coming in, and you look at London, you look at France, there are these like no-go zones within the government where they're saying, okay, you just do your Sharia over there and we won't bother you. But now what is the most popular baby name in London is Muhammad, and they've lost their entire
No, dude, the UK is
culture
gone,
in
man.
London.
The UK is
Right?
not London,
So-
bro. The UK. The
UK in general.
is done. They've been
Right.
completely
And I think what that is it's
taken over.
tyranny through compassion. What we're also saying, ironically,
ignorance.
with
I don't know. The
with,
Reconquista would beg to differ. I'm just saying.
Whoa! So here's the cool thing, Tim. We gotta do an episode on all of this. The Reconquista and like
Slow
during
down,
the
Josh.
Spanish
What are
Inquisition.
you talking about?
I know, right? So the
Yeah.
Okay,
Spanish
the
slow down.
Inquisition.
Reconquista is the reconquering of Spain by
Right.
European and
So-
Spanish Christians, culminating with the expulsion of the last Muslims from their final stronghold in Granada. And so
Yes.
prior to that, the Moors had basically owned Spain all the way up to the border of France. And the only reason they stopped there was because a very forward-thinking French emperor decided that he would take out giant loans from the Pope and just have a standing army waiting for when the Muslims eventually showed
And then
up.
you had the
which they
Battle of
did.
Tours. Yeah.
and this was
Right.
in a time in history where there was conquesting around religion.
I mean,
Yeah, it was
around
obviously
Islam.
defensive in the,
Which
that
is
was why,
different than the
Charlemagne
world we
became,
live in today.
defender of
Yeah.
the
Right.
it's
the
not
faith
different
and
than
all
the,
that.
that's the point. It's not different than the world we live in today, because this is the thing. All anyone remembers is the war. What they don't remember is what led to the war. And that's the point. That the Muslims didn't conquer by just rolling through with the huge army and taking over even back then. They did the exact same thing they're doing now, which is they slowly came in, they immigrated
Right.
into the populations, they built footholds, they built trade with the nations back in the back, and then they eventually, when they reached a position where they had the numbers and the power to do that, they moved. Because remember, the main principle of land warfare is this: you can only keep what you can hold, and a standing army can't stay in place for very long. So you have to have the infrastructure and logistics. And so nobody ever talks about this. You think of like Genghis Khan just rolling through cities and then they're staying there. No, that's not what happens. It's, in some cases, yes, there is a horde that comes through and unseats power, but it usually starts way before that, with a group and a population of people coming in and building lives and trade connections with another place. And so that's what we're trying to say. This is what we're seeing. Yeah, in this day and age, it's not quite the same, at least in the Western world, as like an actual invading force of, it's not like Hamas or Hezbollah coming, over the border, like the caliphate, like we saw. I mean, we say it doesn't happen, but look what happened back with the ISIS caliphate. They did. They rolled through Syria. They rolled through
Yeah.
these other countries and did the same
Every
thing.
place they go.
That's
Yeah.
what we're seeing. We're seeing just short of that. And the only reason that hasn't happened is because that's not preferable. If you look at the main offices in the UK for a lot of, for the government of the UK, you look at they're Muslim. Like they're Secretary of the Interior. They're like all the way up
Wasn't
the
the
chain.
prime minister just?
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
he just a Muslim? Yeah. So, I
no,
mean,
he might have been Indian. I forget. But
was he been Indian? Okay, I'm sorry. But the point that I'm making too is that Christianity up until about the Reformation, and there's a reason for that, but up until the Reformation, the understanding between Christianity and Islam was very aggressive and trying to kill every Christian and push them out. They're burning their churches, all that stuff. The Reformation happened, and Martin Luther was like, well, everything that the Catholics did, everything that the church did prior to the Reformation, they're bad, so we're going to
except for baptizing babies.
Exactly.
That we decided to keep.
Exactly. That was the only thing, right?
Not fighting
Anyway,
off
what
the
I'm
Muslim
pointing
hordes.
at is
Baby baptism.
we
kept that.
don't have a Christianity that says, turn the other cheek when you're under conquest. That has never been the history of Christianity. Christianity has always fought back when it is able to, when it has its armies and stuff. So
may I ask the question then, after this understanding that we're using words like conquest and Muslim population growth, and this happened in the past. So what? I'm a Christian now, and I hear all this information. What should I be doing with this information? Should I be advocating for our immigration policies to keep Muslims out of the United States of America? What do I do with this information?
You should, and because here's why: the presumption of the constitutional order.
Enforce that?
The presumption of the constitutional order assumes that the people who are present are abiding by a certain baseline set of values.
The Bill of Rights.
Right.
And so that doesn't work when you have a large population with an extreme in-group bias whose goal is to reorganize society based on their own internal values. And so minimizing their capacity to influence your society is the same as just preserving your civilization in the first place. So
and
if you
it comes down to they are tied to Sharia. It is part of their culture, of their religion. You can't
theology.
In a massive amount of numbers. I don't care if there's some good Muslims that come in and are integrating into society. That's fine. But when you get to a certain number, statistically, every single time what you see is Sharia taking over, and it is absolutely in opposition to the U.S. Constitution and to Christian moral values.
How do you enforce? I'm not pushing back. I see your point. I agree that we would not want
you write laws banning Sharia.
Sorry,
go ahead.
So in here,
no. Hold on. Let Nick finish real quick. I wanted to hear.
Sorry, Nick. Go ahead.
The rest.
No, it's fine. I lost the thought.
No, you were saying how do you
I'm still trying to
enforce it?
pull on the so what.
Yeah. So here's.
Yeah.
This is the.
They're
reality.
not coming in with a tattooed dot on their forehead.
No, they are.
In.
They're coming in. They're coming in stating that they have this religious belief, and so here's the fundamental question. And this is, to be honest,
part
this
of
is
the immigration practice.
Yeah. Right now, we already do that in our immigration practice. We ask your feelings towards America, the Constitution, and our values. And when you become a United States citizen, especially if you immigrate here, that's part of it. You have to pledge allegiance to American values and American culture. And so this is what says the quiet part out loud. Instead of presuming, like, you say you hold these values, in other words, you believe what the Quran says, it starts by Americans recognizing that these two ideologies are not actually cohesive.
Compatible,
Yeah, they're not compatible.
Right. They are fundamentally opposed to one another.
Right.
And it might start as compatible, but after a certain
No, they're never compatible. They're never compatible. They will feign, and this is what Islam can do.
It's not
and
promoted. Yeah.
Yes, Islam has a theological allowance. They have an allowance in their religion to lie. It's not considered sin for them to lie in order to advance the goals of Islam. Yes, tequila.
So
And
that was
so
what the Spanish Inquisition was about. Like, to be honest with you. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
there was part of it.
There-
So the point is it starts with Americans just recognizing this on their face. It's like, do we allow for people and do we tolerate people coming in and establishing insular societies whose stated values are contrary to the fundamental values of the American people? So that looks like city ordinances, that looks like, education laws in a state. So even if you allow them in, right, they can be here temporarily, they can visit. Like, we allow free exercise of religion. That's fair, right? But we should not make it, as a government, we should not extend the same. And this is where there's legal questions here, right? And these things would have to be challenged in the courts. But this
Sure.
is all part of America coming to the
Yeah,
understanding
but
of what.
here's the problem with what you've just described. You've basically tripped into the classical liberal trap that I was making fun of a minute ago. And this is what the modern, conservative even mindset says, is that, the founding fathers 100% envisioned a pluralistic society where
No, I'm
Buddhists
not
and
saying that.
Muslims
I'm
and all
not
these
saying
other
that.
things.
I didn't
But
hear him
people
say
do.
that.
People
they
argue
do. Yeah.
that
Oh,
was
yes,
the
100% they're
intended
saying that,
meaning
yeah.
of
But it's not.
freedom of religion, and
Yes.
that was never the case.
That's my point.
The
Free exercise is different than enabling something that is contrary
Right,
to
but what's
your.
happened is the classical liberals have become the Trojan horse that
Yes.
the Muslims ride in on, and what they say
Yeah.
is, all religions have to be treated with total equality, and so anything that can be permitted under the guise of religion has to have deference
Extend to them
towards
too.
all religions.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's
So-
not true. And so part of it, Nick, is getting people to understand the incompatibility of those things and breaking out of the idea that there is such a thing as secular religious neutrality. There's not a thing. Our secular religious neutrality is baked in with Christianity, which is why it seems neutral, because, all right, well, the Catholics and the Presbyterians and the Anglicans and the Puritans and the
Sure.
Quakers and all that, but that's all part of a cluster of things. And like Islam is over here.
Right.
And so the idea that you can take this very, very different thing and say, it's just a religion like these others, at the end, at some point you have to say, actually, that's antithetical to the Christian values that are implied.
So I understand and agree with you. I think I'm trying to get you guys to say the quiet part out loud, which is, what are you actually saying? And in the four walls of a church, this conversation makes sense. But the further out we go towards where we find ourselves now in a democratic United States of America, is the quiet part out loud you're trying to say, we just don't let Muslims in our country.
I'm 100% saying that. Yeah,
Right.
I'm
What
100% saying that.
Which is
because-
fairly contradictory. I'm not disagreeing or agreeing. I just was like, is that actually what we're saying or what you're saying?
if it were up to me, that would absolutely be.
Right.
Is that
Well, I mean, there's a lot of
contradictory?
things that-
What is that contradictory to, though?
Well, it just seems as if throughout the history of America, we've never had, and correct me if I'm wrong, any level of you can't be here if you believe these things. We might have
That's not
you
really
can't
true.
be here if you practice these things.
Yeah, that's not really
I'm just
true. In the
curious.
earliest 20th century, there was a really similar immigration problem, like in terms of the proportion of newcomers versus the proportion of people who were already here. Very similar tensions at that time than there are today, right? And so one of the benefits of Western civilization is all of its natural advantages. And if you keep a lid on the total quantity of people who have differing and cohesive ideologies, if you like the total number, they will actually assimilate. Western civilization will break them down and convert them into and there might be some, distributional drift based on that, and that can happen. And that's maybe okay. The problem is we've reached a point where you have cohesive enclaves being set up by this specific group and others. I mean, there's similar problems with Indian populations in Texas who are, I mean, we now have
Yeah.
statues large statues of Indian gods being constructed and,
Yeah.
being the
And
centerpiece of large festivals in Texas. And it's like, guys, I don't think that my country and my notion of some level of governmental neutrality requires me to allow other people to erect statues to false gods and worship them in my country when they weren't even here 50 years ago.
right. Well, and this is what I want to say to answer the question, Nick. It's like, what are we saying here? Yes. The reality is, what this really comes down to is a more, there's a balance. Why haven't we seen this historically, and what are we suggesting now? In previous times in American history, we were a largely homogeneously Christian country. Like,
Which we can safely say is no longer here.
that is not the
That
case
ship
anymore.
has
Generally
sailed.
generally speaking, okay? Well, no, I wouldn't even say yes, that's absolutely true. But I would say that the issue is this. So we could allow people to come in and they do the things people just didn't tolerate. We didn't have to have laws against this stuff. If you tried to build a statue of Vishnu in any part of
The
America
local community
at any
would vote
point in
it
time,
down.
you
Yeah.
would be run out of town. The government wouldn't have had by
totally.
people, right?
The
So,
Mormons were run out of their
right.
areas all the
And
time.
so what I'm saying is, but we've reached this place that, to Nick's point, of where tolerance has enabled and promoted a sense of all peoples, all values, all religions are promoted in understanding, and this undermines the fundamental premise, which I keep saying is it all depends. Like, society stands or falls on their collective understanding of what good and evil is. And when one worldview has one view of what good is and one has a diametrically opposed view, those individuals should not be allowed to set up shop and, unless they're here to assimilate. Like, or
Right.
if they reform their religion. And this has been my issue with Islam since the beginning. Everyone keeps saying, and this used to be the thing back in GWAT. Some of you guys who are older will remember this, the global war on terror.
Got the
People used
pin.
to say this all the time, that, Muslim extremists, it's extremists. No, it's fundamentalists. The people, the Wahhabists, these guys, they simply were doing what the Quran states. And at any point in time, Islam could have reformed their theology and changed. I mean, they can take it from the LDS playbook, You can just write that up. But here's the problem. Their own theology doesn't allow that, because they view the Quran as perfect and infallible, just like we view the Bible. So you're not going to see that. And so that's why, Islam has historically been a problem, because whenever people try to reform it, they get killed by the fundamentalists. And it just, and the reality is that Muslims are just like Christians in America and other parts. Like, there's people who have varying levels of conviction, and so it's very easy to look at, the doctor or the lawyer who's a Muslim and be like, John's never gonna do anything. Like, and he's like, he goes to mosque on, whatever day, and then that's it. And we just let that slide. But the reality is it's not that Islam is safe. It's just that, John's a bad Muslim. Like, that's the problem. So we can't.
Well,
So, like, what are we saying to people here?
it's also the difference of here's the difference, right? Is, do I think that every one of the leftists who openly celebrated Charlie Kirk's death is personally going to commit a similar act of violence? No. Is it a real problem that there's that many of them who are willing to openly celebrate it? Yes, very much so. And that's what you see. And that's backed up by Pew research
Statistically,
on
yeah.
Muslims specifically, is that,
Mhm.
sure, the vast majority of them aren't going to personally commit acts of terror. I mean, this used to be like a Daily Show bit or Colbert where they would be like, well,
Right.
if, 100 million Muslims are extremists, if there's 100 million terrorists out there, that, we would have a big problem. And it's like, okay, but there's 100 million who support it and are not going to do anything to constrain that element. And in fact, they approve of it. And the higher the concentration of the Muslim area they're in, the more openly they approve
Yeah,
of
see
it.
example Gaza.
How is
So,
this
yeah.
not a similar slippery slope around any other form of ideology that we would not agree with?
Well, think
You're
about
not
this.
allowed in this
Nazism.
country.
Well,
That's
We don't let
what you've
Nazis-
just articulated is the siren call of classical liberalism. It says,
Right.
boy, if we make a value judgment about what we think, somebody else might make a value judgment that we're evil. And then we would have a conflict. And what we're saying is the conflict is upon you, whether you would have it or not. Those people
Right.
have already made
I
that
was just trying
judgment
to figure
about
out how you
you.
square it. I
Well,
understand.
Yeah.
that's the
How-
difficulty.
Here's how I square it.
I-
It's
yeah.
super simple. Good things are good and bad things are bad.
Right.
Well, no,
I get
the-
to make
the-
value
the-
judgments, and I get to enforce those
well,
judgments to the extent I have power to do
simplicity
so.
in communication that I think you're saying is that we are continually trying to roll up to an ultimate authority of truth, which is God and the Bible.
Yeah,
and
right.
that
No,
is
because
where
we're not in a
we're
purity
gonna
spiral.
make
Okay?
decisions off of that. So pick an ideology, left, liberal,
Let's do leftism,
mystic,
cultural Marxism.
which is pick anything that's a very different than Christians.
We'd apply
You
it
know.
the same way. If you're antithetical to if your definition of good is different than the Bible's, what I'm
Right.
saying.
Well, that's why the DOJ or the Department of State has revoked visas for people that have immigrated here for college that are protesting, certain things that we would
Correct,
deem as
which is
evil
to your
or as
point,
good.
to your
So-
literal point, which is why this
Yeah.
thread makes sense. I'm more just trying to clarify.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I mean, granted, with everything, you have to gradually work your way into change because what you said is, and this is where you can close on this particular topic and move on. But we have lost the homogeny essentially of a Christian culture country from a large standpoint. We've got 50% of the country, or a large portion of the country that would disagree with us, and so you have to take it back by engaging with the culture, very much with what Charlie Kirk did, right? You engage, you have the
Mhm.
conversations, and
That's-
when
that's
you
one
know you're winning
strategy.
is when they start getting violent.
And
So,
that's
we
one
have to engage
strategy, and
with the
that's
Muslims,
true. But I think it undersells one critical point that I'll illustrate just by example. You look at the larger cultural acceptance of gay marriage, that was essentially
Yeah.
court ruled into
Mhm. Yeah.
existence. So
That's
the
right.
acceptance, and this is usually an argument that's used to tell Christians not to exercise force. It's basically, oh, just convince people and then win elections. Well, actually, you can seriously turn the rudder of the ship by force.
Are
by
you saying you
this is how
can
things.
legislate morality?
I am saying the only thing that gets legislated is morality.
That's right. That's the right
I'm done.
answer.
Okay, next
Anyway,
topic,
we're moving
guys.
on.
What else we
That
got on
that
we're talking about
flows in
Conor McGregor.
very well to the next topic.
All right, who's got the next one?
Let's go.
But Tim just very clearly segued us into the most perfect next thing to discuss, where we would be legislating morality, which is a very brief anecdote, and then we will move on to our next topic, which is, hey, Christians, pay attention to the world around you, because your vote matters around things like abortion and like assisted suicide and like school choice and like same-sex marriage. And there are certain states, which we don't have to name, and elections coming up where your vote matters, because to the point that was just made, if you do nothing, this stuff gets institutionalized forever in state constitutions. It's kind of a big deal.
Yes, absolutely. We keep talking about this, and it bears repeating. Like, one of the things we do this podcast for is to help people build confidence in their convictions. So hopefully, when you listen to this, you hear us and you think, yes, I also think that way, and I am not alone. And that, maybe we say things a little tongue-in-cheek and we might be a little hyperbolic, but it's because a lot of times, and I'm sure other people feel this way as well, I feel like some of us feel like I'm like dragging people, trying to motivate them to live out their convictions. I know that many of you feel a certain way, and maybe you lack the confidence to say it out loud or to say it in a group of people, or let alone to even make very deliberate and uncaveated statements. but that's what's needed right now. And it starts with being able to do little things like that. Or maybe if you're not even able to do it publicly, at least privately, at least in America, or if you live in a country where voting is a thing, you can do that, And we just we just want to inspire people to understand, have convictions, one, and live them out. In your faith, it's super huge. We do have a moral obligation to utilize what God has given us to his glory, and to use what's been given us to, prevent evil and sin in our society,
Well,
whether or
even
not people
today,
agree with it or not.
I
Go ahead.
see shyness around basic things like people not being okay with gay expressions of, the things that they do in gay marriage and things like that. There's always kind of this which is fine. It's like,
No.
they object to it, but then they're like, but they want to make this like kind little compromise carve out that says, but we just, if what they do in the privacy of their own, and it's like, no, at the end of the day, you actually have to have the courage to say that's wrong, and that needs to be minimized in civilization.
Yeah. So
Here's a
voting.
question for you guys. I have never, and again, we're not talking about specific sides or candidates. I feel like even after this podcast, after some of the last 5 years of recent events that have taken place, I feel like I've gotten even more motivated around my civic duty combined with
Yep.
my
Me too.
Christianity and what that means in
I'm
this. So I
every
have a
day becoming
confession to
more
make.
radicalized.
I made my first political donation to the tune of buying a mug for the candidate that I
All
want
right.
to win.
Baby
And I
steps.
voted yesterday. But
That's
no,
awesome.
my question is I was interestingly wrestling with should I be doing more than just casting my individual vote around such issue that could be on the line? And I was like, oh yeah, I'll throw $30. But again, I don't know. It was an interesting question for me personally as a Christian of I'm starting to see the actual implications and fallouts of governmental things and how it impacts the world I live in and the soup I
Yeah.
swim in. And I was very much pulled in the direction of oh yeah, my investment to this missionary 100% matters. I'm not saying it doesn't. And these other kingdom oriented investments, we've talked about tithing on this episode, matters. But then I was very strongly pulled towards my ROI for investment dollars in some of these specific categories is oh, that's interesting. That one might be justified as well. I don't know. I was just curious how you all felt about that.
So from the standpoint of allowing our theology to affect our politics, I'm actually of the mindset right now, I would be for local churches raising funds and sponsoring a candidate for our local community.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's
Why
a hot
aren't we doing
that?
Oh,
why
you're
aren't we
not
doing
doing
that?
it because the IRS will
Yep.
Yeah.
absolutely
true.
punish
Well, then
you.
take
Wait,
away
actually,
the
there was just a
tax
recent. Hold
write-offs
on, we'll have to
and
fact check
benefits
this.
of churches.
Hold on, we need to actually
I don't
fact
care.
check this. But I'm actually
That's
pretty
why
sure that
that's why PACs or
that
whatever
was
they're called were
changed.
created.
I'm pretty
It
sure
was
there was a recent ruling.
it was basically a ruling, like a rule-making thing, like sort of the way they issue like memorandums and say this is our current enforcement guidance. And that's true. It doesn't change the fact that, the next time there is a ideologically opposed candidate
They don't
in
come after it.
office,
Yeah.
that they will, yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay,
And so
so then you
churches have generally taken the position that their explicitly ministerial work, their discipleship and evangelism, is more important than their political activities, and so they avoid that one. And we may be getting to a point though where maybe the practical considerations of those political activities are more obviously supportive of the more core efforts of discipleship and evangelism.
And there's ways.
Right.
There are ways to do this without having to deal with
Exactly.
that. And that's really the big problem. And it's funny that you said that, Josh, because even though it is a reasonable place, because it's where a lot of our brains go. And the next question is great as well, because it's the way that we solve problems many times is with resourcing, right? Those who can't go, give. Those who can't
Slay
run.
them.
Who's
Who's got the
Spend.
Who's got them?
We are.
That's
What is
it.
it? The Lottie Moon.
That's it. Lottie
This
Moon
is
Christmas
a perfect
offering.
opportunity
That's
for
it.
you
Lottie
to
Moon
give your
Christmas offering.
tithes and offerings
Tithes and
to the
offerings.
episode here. Leave your
That's
likes
right.
and your subscribes and your shares.
That's right. That's
do
right.
it.
That's it. So the point is this: that is the mentality that plagues our society because we are a consumer-oriented society. What I would rather see, what I think is infinitely more effective, is collective accountability. And we're gonna do it. We're gonna do an episode on accountability here soon. But what I mean by that is if you make sure that the people who have power over your life know your name and have to think of your face when they cast a vote, that is infinitely more powerful than a $5, $10, $100 contribution to a campaign or a campaign sign. If that dude has to, or woman who is going to vote one way or the other knows that they're going to have to look you in the eye and account for what they did, or if your business or your little corner of society won't tolerate or extend, or you can create consequences for people who align against your values in that capacity, and we start doing that, then you're going to see things change real quick. But you know where it starts is pastors have to be willing to even talk about this stuff from the pulpit at all. Or even if they don't want to talk about it from the pulpit, talk about it from some platform like the I'm Telling God About This podcast. So you got to have some mechanism for getting to the people and having conversations. And listen, as a pastor, I do understand, and there is a tension and a balance between what we discuss in the pulpit and what we don't, and what's going on that time. But it's not impossible to do. The Bible's there's plenty of opportunities to discuss civic duty and what we do with what's been given to us. Like, just Parable of Talents, I've quoted a couple other ones. Like, there's any number of direct manifestations of that in our current modern context that play out. So yeah, I think people, that's what's really starting to happen right now is we're not doing the whole silent majority, moral majority thing anymore. What we need to start seeing is a very overt and very clear and deliberate staking of who we are and what we believe. Like, what does this country exist for?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So
Good talk.
on that note,
What's the? Oh gosh, here we go. Tim,
we've got a
this is gonna be
great
fun.
banger.
Let's preface this. This is going to be fun. All right,
a
here we
banger
go.
from one of our
let's see.
favorites. We'd love to have him on the podcast.
All right, here we
this
go.
one. Yeah. Okay.
What are we looking at right now?
So
right.
this was Mark Driscoll.
Oh.
This is what I was trying to fight with Hughes about because
Read it
know,
for the
Mark.
podcast listeners.
so he goes. This is on X. He goes. It seems that the only thing young men are better at than young women is killing themselves. Porn, video games, and mediocrity has absolutely enveloped an entire generation of boys.
I
Bam.
feel like this was so poorly stated in so many ways.
So many ways. Well, like, because one of you said it. Oh, it's just rage bait, but this
That's
is
kind
like
of how it vibes.
this
yeah.
is boomer feminism, is what it is. It's
Yeah.
this general like, oh, boys are better than, or sorry, girls are better
Did we
than
say
boys.
Mark
You know,
Driscoll, for those listening, not on video, we just read an X post from Pastor Mark.
Yeah, he
Driscoll.
did.
Yeah, he
said that.
clarified that in the beginning.
Okay.
But it's good
Yeah.
to
Sorry.
reaffirm that.
And so, here's the thing. If you just said the second part, all those social ails have, enveloped, like, okay, sure. It's weird to phrase it that way and say, oh, these things have enveloped a generation of boys. But then to like almost non sequitur mash it together with this girls are better than boys thing. It's like, what proportion? I think I saw a survey that was like 20% of young women have been on OnlyFans. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, so
Yeah.
are you seriously?
It's not, I think again, I'm not disagreeing with, you have to look
Also,
at this.
Young women's consumption of pornography is off the charts right now. So
So it's not, this
Right,
is
but
my
it's a lot
thing.
more fashionable to imply that
Yeah.
women are inherently more constructive, moral, ordered, all of these things.
Yeah.
And it's fashionable to dunk on dudes.
Okay,
Like,
but
it is.
here's the reality though. This is part of the thing of I think this is part of the problem with X, right? This is part of this is the problem with tweets in general. So Mark
Mhm.
Driscoll is a huge fan of men. That's his whole thing is like
Yeah,
get to the men
that is
first.
so true.
So he's all about uplifting and building up men. So if he's being derogatory towards by comparing men to women, like I see that more as him trying to like to say like, yeah, you're right. Hey, there shouldn't be a difference between men and women because it seems like the only thing that men are actually doing better is these things. So I can read it the way that you read it, and I totally see that. And you can ask the question, is this a
And
pastoral thing to
I
say?
understand where he's coming from. I do
Yeah.
that whole like, oh, I'm gonna criticize you so that, you know, I can motivate you to be better or
Yeah.
whatever. But if I'm a young man and I see something like that, it's like, screw you, man. Okay, you can go back to continuing this elevation of women in our society generally
Yeah.
because, oh, we've just abdicated
you're-
responsibility. What you need to, you're talking about a generation of young men that isn't lazy, that hasn't abdicated responsibility. They have been systematically pushed out of society. Higher education disproportionately enrolls and rewards women. Even cutting edge industries, you know, with
Yeah.
technology and various things, have created a gynocratic overlord system no, it's true, in
No, I
terms
know,
of
I
like
just like the term.
HR and project management. This is what has happened, and they've said, oh, they treat the intellectual producers amongst the men, because that's true. Your engineers, your top tier software, those are men. Like, I know that's still offensive to some people, but it is disproportionately men who
Yeah.
have the drive and the singular focus to do some of those things at a very high level. So
Agreed with all of that.
right,
But
and so
go ahead.
you don't look at them. It's extremely stupid. Even if I accept the premise that that kind of comment is a strategy, it's an extremely poorly suited one to this moment where you have boys saying, you know, looking at someone like Andrew Tate and being like, well, that guy just says that I was born with the power, and if I want something, I can take it.
Right.
So what I
Right?
hear
You can
saying,
understand how that's an attractive mindset
yeah.
to people who have been systematically shut out of the
So
legitimate
that's
paths
good.
towards
I
power
like
and
this.
influence.
We should actually do a whole episode on this, but I want to touch on it because I think you've hit something here that is I think is really good.
Here's some
What I'm
fairly
hearing you
insightful.
saying is this. What's out of touch. What'd you say?
Go ahead.
All right. What's out of touch about this is how it resonates. And I can speak I can speak to this because my connection to Mark Driscoll from 2009 when I was leading worship at their Olympia campus, that resonated because it was a more delayed adolescence. It was the start, like it was during the financial crisis, like nobody had jobs. So like I don't think people had quite put together that we were being pushed out. Like this was kind of the start of that endeavor. But at this point, it's very clear that, yeah, the DEI thing, society had optimized for inclusion and getting certain things and a combination of things that are not their fault, or I shouldn't say not their fault, but they were at a disadvantage men have been at a disadvantage because of bad parenting.
Young men
lack of
did not
concentration.
build the world they occupy
Yes,
in.
correct. I
And that's
agree.
the issue that I take, is he is quite clearly ridiculing them
Yes.
for something that is not
Yes.
is not a set of circumstances they made.
But let me highlight this because I think this is what you said that I thought was really good, is that the question is not like these men, it's speaking to their motivating, like what's actually motivating, right? Like he's detached. He doesn't understand that these men want that, but have not been equipped to know how to go after it, have experienced systematic,
Proactively prevent it.
proactively been marginalized. But I don't want to fall into the trap, and I do think it is still fair to say, because we could use this exact same argument with African American men in society on the flip side, and people have made this exact same argument to justify DEI. So what I'm saying though is what you're getting at is motivating them, the Andrew Tate model of inspiring them by casting vision and saying this is what you were called to, this is what you could have, this is what was taken, is different than saying you don't have this because you're not motivated or you're not taking advantage of it. Is that accurate?
Um, yeah, I guess I think it's still because here's the thing. I would argue that Mark Driscoll, just by age and influence, is more responsible for the state of the world with respect to young men today than any of the young men he's supposedly criticizing. That's why I consider it deeply out of touch,
Well,
right?
you're gonna have to
Not be-
specify that because I think he's been on the forefront of the opposite of that. Like Mark Driscoll is the Andrew Tate of
I said by
Protestantism.
Based on his age.
I said
yeah, no,
based
but even
on
by
his age.
Yeah.
The world is more a product of
Yeah.
his actions and his cohort.
Sure,
so I'm
his
saying
cohort,
that he would be much more accurate to level the criticism at his own peers by age and say, hey, why did you guys have such low moral
like
fiber to allow the proliferation of
blame
porn?
the old men.
Not to say nothing of his, like, even criticizing video games, like, what is this, 1992? Like, oh, video games, that's the problem with, it's like,
these darn boys. I'll never forget being in a sermon and Mark basically saying, like, young lady, like, if your boyfriend or your fiance is spending more than an hour a week playing video games, you need to just move on. Like,
yeah,
everybody in the room was just like,
it's a weird perspective.
Got a bad take.
Like, literally, when books were invented and became commonplace and literacy was a thing,
they were
you
the devil.
literally had people saying things like, well, you being so bookish isn't good for you. Just like that was the idea, was that your diversion of things into that is inherently bad. And so it's just one of these anachronistic perspectives, like, oh, well, they just want to smoke weed and play video games. It's like, well, they have been shut out of all of the legitimate paths towards influence, wealth, power, feeling valued. They have been systematically robbed of all of those things on purpose so that they could be given to women, so that they could be given to immigrants. I mean, that the H-1B issue with, like, tons of cutting edge industries cutting their workforce costs by staffing up with non-Americans, like, preferentially at lower price points. You can't tell me that that's not them systematically being shut out of those paths. And the problem is, those young men are not layabout, useless, mediocre, unmotivated people. They are young men. And that means that they inherently hold the reins of power. And when I say inherently, not to say they have power right now, but what that means is that if young men, if half of them, if 20% of them, ages 16 to 29, decided that they wanted society to be a certain way, the combined power of the entire rest of civilization would not be able to stop them. So you don't look at that demographic and say, well, you're just a bunch of useless, porn-addled video gamers who are never going to amount to anything. Because the thing is, they can choose to amount to something at any time they want to, and you had better pray that that doesn't come at your specific expense for having enabled their dispossession in the first place.
That's right, which is why we built a podcast for you called the I'm Telling God About This podcast to inspire that exact demographic. And we see the stats, and we know you're there, and we love you and believe in you, okay? So, on that note, let's talk about another champion of the common man, Conor McGregor, okay?
Conor McGregor is now a Christian.
Conor McGregor is now a Christian. Listen, we didn't do the whole clickbait episode. The thumbnail might be, but we'll see. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking around. And if you skipped all the other stuff to come to this point, by all means, go back and check it out.
I am not here just by chance. There is a higher power, God, that dictates my journey and all of our journeys. And I live my life by God's word. And since around that time that you mentioned at the last event, I've engaged on a spiritual journey. And I'm saved, I am healed. And on the back of that, the world is in for a treat. The world is in for a treat. My competitive spark that was once in my heart is now a roaring blaze. You know, I'm eager to get back. And right now I had to dial myself in and go inward. And that I done. And I'm very, very excited to come back my own self. I am not
All
here-
right. Dude, I want to believe. I want to believe so bad. I know it's probably not going to take. I know I'm going to see him on a Lamborghini, like with a half-naked woman promoting his stout at some point on Instagram, but I want to believe.
Right.
I mean, there's a few different
just-
paths you could take at that point. You've got like the Boondock Saints arc, right?
Right.
You know,
If he
one.
starts doing the Boondock Saints prayer as he's choking someone
my
out in
gosh.
Shepherd's we shall be for thee, my Lord, for thee.
Oh,
I need a Sora video of that to cut in here.
Yeah.
Of
Oh, I
Conor
know.
McGregor doing
No,
the
you know-
shepherd's prayer.
I do want to believe. It's hard though because there is such, and we see it, you know, we give the benefit of the doubt as best we can, but we see the grift, you know, especially among people that have had these falls from grace or these, you know, bad behaviors, bad pasts, and then they suddenly are like, oh, I found Jesus and I'm saved, and then everyone's like, great, and then they continue living like they always did because they've gotten this pass by society saying, oh no, they've changed, but there's no
I don't feel
genuine heart
any
change.
inclination to be critical of him at all, because in the past when we've done some of these things with like the guy who's the guy with the long hair, Rusty Rockets on X. He's,
Russell
Brand.
Brand. That's my
Yeah,
man,
Russell
dude.
Russell
well, yeah,
Brand.
but the difference is in situations like his, the way he postured himself was basically now he's speaking to Christians in an influential and specifically Christian manner. I'm like, well, that doesn't quite hold up with, you know, fresh conversion when it seems like there's a lot of stuff that isn't quite in place there. What Conor McGregor said was just extremely personal, very straightforward. I see absolutely nothing there to say, oh, you're just trying to gin up some influence with the Christian community or expand your brand and audience. It's like that sounds pretty much like
Bang on.
what I would expect it to.
So the context here is he's doing a press conference, right, for this bare knuckle fighting league, which I think he's a partial owner in. And it was during the question and answer. The first question he gets asked is by one of these dudes. He's in Italy, by the way. And for this,
Yeah, maybe
and,
that context helps with the
yeah,
answer
and he's asked
question.
like, "Hey, your attitude, like we've seen like a change, kind of in like your, you know, your attitude since the last fight, and like you're much more. You seem to be a lot more." You know, introspect, like your tone is very different than when you've been on the scene before. Because if you're familiar with Conor McGregor, which I should have said at the onset, UFC, Google, great fights, fantastic fighter, but not exactly what you would consider a Christian guy. This isn't Shia LaBeouf, you know, like going back and forth, you know, 5,000 times, right? This is
right.
this would be a pretty powerful conversion, but. Yeah, and that's exactly what you saw. I'm inclined to agree with you. It wasn't a pre-thought out, developed like, oh, I'm going to drop this. And I think
Yeah, that's right.
I think we're going to see more of this because I mean, you even heard the crowd cheer, you know, when he said that, like openly in a press conference. Like that's not a thing that Christians used to do. Like like someone says, I'm a Christian and I've been saved. Like you're not hearing like the press junket go, you know, crazy about that. And
right.
I think
The response would have been like, oh, did you just get out of rehab again?
right.
Is that, you know?
Exactly. Like we've heard conversion stories like this before. What is it about this that makes you feel like you're, you know, but that's the thing is I think that people are seeing the fruit and they're realizing that like, because people are starting to be more outspoken, people are starting to realize that things that people have kept in their hearts or things that they agree with or didn't agree with. And I think it's helping them draw it back to the roots. They're like, I live this sinful, evil way, but I agree with this thing or that thing. Did you guys lose my audio or are we good?
No, we're
No, you're
good.
good.
Yeah. This thing or that thing where people are like, man, my life is crap. I have a problem with these things, but I have no way of saying why I feel bad about them. So I'm not going to say it out loud. But as they start as Christians start to talk and understand, hey, you were created for more than this. This is an abomination. God hates this. God loves this. These things, yeah, I agree with all of that. Yeah, these other things that you're doing, those are cancer, and they're gonna lead to death. And these people who have been living like that are like, yeah, that actually totally tracks, because I hate myself when I do these things, or I have these, this sense of, uneasiness or upset, and they're willing to try something else, because for the last 20 years, all the people who they've gone to for help are like, listen, live your truth, just do your thing, find, this. And these people have accumulated wealth, power, relationships. They can talk to anybody they want to, and they're coming up short,
I have an important question, though, in all of this. I mean, given the heritage that Conor McGregor is Irish, is he Catholic or Protestant? Like,
I mean,
that kind of matters in this whole debate. We'll see.
I'll take either one at this point, but we have opinions. Okay, Connor, we have opinions.
Oh
dude,
my goodness.
What a crazy thing. Oh, speaking of Catholic Protestant, and we'll make this little nod before we sign off. Did you guys see Pints with Aquinas got acquired by the Daily Wire?
Saw that coming. That was only a matter of time.
Yeah, exactly. But
he's had a lot of the Daily Wire guests on as of late.
It was coming.
I've been seeing that.
I'm sensing
I
a
can pull
creep
that
of
card.
What?
I know Matt Frad's personal assistant phone number.
Let's do it.
He's in our content.
I'm here for it. Do you want to hear us get on with Pints of Aquinas? That'd be great. We could talk about the growing Catholicization of the Daily Wire. How does Ben feel about that?
And we'll just have to remind him that
we got Michael Knowles, we got Pints with Aquinas.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro.
I'm pretty sure
if Ben Shapiro were to convert,
Catholic
we already
go into a bar together.
He's going to be a Baptist.
That's what I'm saying.
He wants to.
That's what I'm saying.
He's got to get rid of
it. Listen, we'll go with
I feel
if they're not against
Catholics have a lot more like historical bad blood with the Jews than the Protestants, but maybe that's just because they've been around longer.
Inquiring minds.
That was so funny, man. If you didn't watch our episode on is Ben Shapiro as a Baptist, it was quite funny. He was talking with Michael Knowles, and Michael Knowles was like, if you were to be Protestant or Catholic, if you were to convert, which would you be? Michael Knowles was like, you're going to be Catholic, duh. I mean, it makes the most sense. It's the same thing as the traditions of Judaism.
But if you want to find out what happens, you have to watch the episode, and you're not going to give it away, so they don't go and watch the episode, Josh. Anyway,
I haven't seen the episode, and now I'm curious.
Click on the episode if you want the answer.
I'm going to rail them off. Go watch the episode. Come on. I know none of you watched it, because there's only like 40 views on it, so get over there. Check it out. Till next time. Get off my lawn. Gaslight us.
We know you want to talk about receipts. I got human history and Western civilization. What do you have? 20 years of dumpster fires, purple hair. People who don't know which bathroom to go into. Get off my lawn.